Good evening, brave souls. I'm Grim, and tonight I'll be your companion through the shadows. Together, we'll dive into stories that grow darker with every whisper. So, get comfortable if you're ready. The night is only just beginning. On Halloween, young Ben was rummaging through his grandma's attic. He was hunting for a costume after forgetting to buy one for trick-or-treating. Dust filled the air, clinging to old boxes and forgotten furniture. At the back of the attic, hidden beneath a pile of blankets, he found an old trunk, its hinges rusted and squeaky. Inside, Ben discovered a peculiar costume. It was a faded, patched-up jester's suit, black and red, with tiny silver bells sewn along the edges. He felt a thrill as he ran his fingers over the fabric, which was cold to the touch, despite the warm, stuffy attic. The suit seemed to call to him. Excited, he slipped into the costume. It fit perfectly, like it was made just for him, even though it looked like it had been there for decades. The moment he fastened the last button, he felt a shiver crawl up his spine. The attic lights flickered, casting strange shadows. For a split second, he thought he saw his reflection grinning in the cracked mirror in the corner of the room, even though he wasn't smiling. The sight unnerved him, but he shook it off. After all, it was Halloween. "Mom, look!" Ben called as he clattered down the stairs, the little bells jingling with each step. His mom glanced over and froze. Her face turned pale, and her smile faded. "Where did you find that, Ben?" "Just in the attic," he replied, spinning around to show off. "Pretty cool, huh?" But his mom looked unsettled, her eyes distant. She shook her head and forced a smile. "Well, don't be out too late. Be back by 9, okay?" Ben nodded, eager to meet up with his friends. He didn't notice the way his mom watched him from the doorway, her worry lingering long after he'd disappeared down the street. As he walked toward his friend's house, a strange sensation crept over him. The air felt colder, and every step made the bells jingle softly in the silent night. His neighborhood, usually lively on Halloween, seemed oddly still. Houses that usually had decorations now had darkened windows, almost as if they were abandoned. "Ben?" a voice called. He turned to see his friend, Jason, standing a few feet away, a look of confusion on his face. "Whoa, that costume, you look kinda creepy." Ben laughed, trying to shrug it off. "Just trying to be spooky, man." But even as he joked, he felt a strange itch crawling under his skin, like something in the suit was waking up. He looked at his hands and saw that his fingertips were pale and slightly gray, almost lifeless. He tried to rub them, but the color wouldn't come off. "Let's go," Ben said quickly, eager to shake off the eerie feeling. As the night went on, they moved from house to house, collecting candy. But something strange began happening. Each time Ben rang a doorbell, he noticed people would gasp, take a step back, and quickly toss candy into his bag without making eye contact. A few whispered, "That's a strange choice of costume," before shutting the door in a hurry. Jason seemed to be getting nervous too. "Ben, you're acting weird, and you look different." "What do you mean?" Ben asked, though he felt a heaviness spreading through his body. Jason stepped back, frowning. "Your eyes, they look dark." Ben glanced at a window, hoping to catch his reflection. His eyes were shadowed, as though rings of darkness were spreading around them. His smile, too, seemed stretched, pulling his mouth wider than it should go. It wasn't his reflection anymore. It was a stranger, someone, or something else. "Maybe we should go back," Jason said, edging away. But Ben shook his head, feeling a pull to keep going. "Come on, it's just a costume. We still have houses to hit." Jason hesitated, but followed, though he kept his distance. As they moved from house to house, the streets grew quieter. It felt as though they were stepping into a different world, one where shadows moved on their own, and distant whispers echoed with every step. Then they reached the last house on the block, a decrepit old place that everyone usually avoided. But tonight, Ben felt compelled to go up to it. Jason held back, watching with wide eyes as Ben climbed the creaky steps. Ben knocked on the door. The house felt alive, as though it was breathing, waiting. The door opened slowly, revealing a dim hallway filled with cobwebs. There was no one there, but a faint voice echoed, "Come in, little jester." Ben's legs moved on their own, carrying him inside. The door slammed shut, and he was swallowed by darkness. The sound of the bells on his costume grew louder, until they were almost deafening, drowning out his thoughts. In the dark, he saw shadows shifting, forming faces that sneered and whispered, "Another one joins us. Another lost soul." "Wait, what's happening?" Ben tried to shout, but his voice was muffled, trapped in his own head. He felt himself fading, his body merging with the jester suit, the cursed fabric wrapping around him tighter and tighter. Then he realized he wasn't the first. The costume had been worn by others before him, each Halloween claiming a new child who dared to wear it. Each child's soul was trapped, adding to the sinister essence that fueled the costume's curse. As he struggled, flashes of memories, not his own, flickered in his mind. Children from different times, each with the same look of horror, each realizing too late that they couldn't escape. Ben could feel their fear, their hopelessness, pressing in on him, trapping him. "Help!" he screamed. But the costume only laughed, a sound that echoed from deep within. Outside, Jason waited, staring at the darkened house. Minutes passed, and Ben didn't come out. Jason called his name, but there was no answer. He felt a chill, like a warning, and turned to run home. The next morning, Ben's mom knocked on his door, expecting to find him buried in candy wrappers. But his bed was empty. She checked the attic, hoping he'd come back to put the costume away. But the trunk was gone. For weeks, they searched the town, posting flyers and asking neighbors. But no one had seen him. It was as if he'd vanished into thin air. Only Jason knew about that last cursed house, but he was too afraid to go back and speak of what he'd seen. Years passed, and eventually, Ben's family moved away. But the old house remained, untouched, waiting. One Halloween night, a new family moved into the neighborhood. Their young son wandered into his attic, discovering a peculiar jester costume lying in an old, dusty trunk. He felt a strange pull as he touched it, a thrill of excitement that he couldn't quite explain. In the silence of the attic, he slipped it on, and somewhere deep within the fabric, a faint, trapped whisper echoed, joining the others, waiting for the next Halloween night. It was the last week of October, and the Williams family decided to visit the small, hidden pumpkin patch on the edge of town. The place was called simply Whispering Acres. Mr. and Mrs. Williams, along with their two children, Lily and Max, had always loved the crisp, eerie magic of Halloween. But this year was different. They had heard rumors about Whispering Acres from friends who swore that every pumpkin there held a whisper of a story. But the real truth? No one really knew. As they pulled up to the edge of the old, misty field, the family was met with an unusual quiet. The pumpkins, scattered throughout the field in no particular order, seemed to sit in absolute stillness, each one perfectly round and untouched. The patch's entrance sign swung in the wind with an unsettling creak. Whispering acres. Pick with care. "I don't know," Mr. Williams murmured, shivering as he read the sign. "This place feels strange." "Oh, come on. It's just pumpkins, Dad," Max laughed, racing toward the field. Lily followed, clutching her favorite scarf. They wandered among the pumpkins, Max and Lily bouncing from one to the other, laughing, tugging their parents along. But then Lily stopped. She crouched by a pumpkin just a bit larger than her head, a flicker of something strange in her eyes. "Dad," she called out, her voice soft. "This pumpkin, it's whispering." Mr. Williams chuckled, though the air suddenly felt colder. "Pumpkins don't whisper, honey. They're just pumpkins." But Lily wouldn't move. She tilted her head, her face turning pale as she leaned closer. "No, Dad. It's talking. Listen." Mrs. Williams, sensing the tension, joined her daughter. She leaned in, and for a moment, she froze. Then she pulled back, her face blank with confusion. "Tom," she whispered, "I heard something, too." Lily, trembling, reached out a hand and touched the pumpkin's surface. The moment her fingers made contact, a quiet voice filled her mind, drifting like a mist. Lost. Alone. Forgotten. Lily gasped and jerked her hand back. "Did you hear it?" she whispered, looking to her parents. Max, ever the skeptic, grinned and crouched next to another pumpkin, determined to hear something too. He pressed his ear to it. The air around him grew cold, and he could swear he heard someone's faint breath, like they were struggling to speak. "Help me! Don't forget!" Max leaped back, his grin wiped away. "Dad, that pumpkin, it's haunted," he stammered. They moved further into the patch, and everywhere they went, it was the same. Each pumpkin they touched whispered fragments of lost stories, voices full of regret, sadness, and sometimes anger. As they roamed the field, the whispers grew louder, overlapping, filling the quiet field with a symphony of sorrow. The family couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched by invisible eyes, their presence disturbing the slumber of countless souls. Suddenly, Lily shrieked. She pointed to a small, particularly faded pumpkin. The voice inside this one was different. It was desperate, crying out as though trapped. "She's here, with the others, lost to the patch, trapped." "Mom," Lily whispered. "Who's she? Who's trapped?" Mrs. Williams felt an icy chill settle over her. "Let's leave, Tom, now," she urged. But just as she turned to lead her family back, Max called out, "Wait! There's one more!" He had wandered deeper into the field, standing before a massive pumpkin covered in cracks. As he stared at it, he felt an overwhelming urge to touch it, as if it was calling to him. When his fingers brushed its surface, the whispering around them faded, all voices falling silent. And then, in the dead quiet, a low, gravelly voice rumbled from the cracked pumpkin. "You disturbed us. You brought life into this patch. Now you must hear our stories." The voice resonated through each member of the Williams family, pressing against their minds like an ancient force. And with it came images of people, faces they didn't know, flashing before them in fragments. There was the face of a young woman with sorrowful eyes, an old man clinging to a pocket watch, a little girl clutching a doll. And then a terrible truth hit them. The people they were seeing were those who had vanished from the town over the years. all people who had gone missing around Halloween, never to be seen again. "It's them," Mrs. Williams murmured, horrified. "These are their spirits, trapped." The silence was broken by a sudden, mournful howl echoing through the patch. Shadows shifted, pooling beneath each pumpkin. The air grew thick, charged with an unseen energy, and a gust of wind swept through the field, scattering dead leaves and chilling them to the bone. "Mom," Lily whimpered, grabbing her mother's hand. "They're coming for us." As the wind grew stronger, the pumpkins started to glow faintly, one by one, as if a candle had been lit within each hollow shell. Their faces, hidden just moments before, were now twisted with expressions of anguish, anger, and despair. The Williams family stumbled back, horror dawning on them. They were surrounded by pumpkins, each one now staring at them with hollow, accusing eyes. The air hummed with their sorrow, with a grief that pressed down like a weight on their chests. "Stay with us," the voices whispered together. "Help us escape." Mr. Williams grabbed his children, desperate to protect them. "Run!" he shouted, pulling them toward the car. But the ground beneath their feet seemed to shift and buckle, as though the patch itself were trying to pull them back. They stumbled forward, pushing against the invisible pull of the field, until finally they reached the edge. They turned back one last time, watching the pumpkins dim, the whispers fading back into silence. The faces of the spirits vanished, leaving only the faint memory of their sorrow. In the car, the Williams family drove in silence, too shaken to speak. But the images of those faces haunted them, their eyes full of longing and hopelessness. And as they left whispering acres behind, they could still hear, faint and distant, the sound of voices carried by the wind. That night, as they sat around the dinner table, Max broke the silence. Do you think they're still there, stuck in that field?" His mother's face was pale. "I don't know, Max," she whispered. "But one thing is certain. That patch, it's not just pumpkins. It's something else. A place where the forgotten dead wait for someone to remember." They didn't speak of it again, but every Halloween after that, they'd hear whispers on the wind, as if the voices of whispering acres had followed them, asking to be freed, to be remembered. The Williams family would never return to the patch, but every Halloween, the sound of those whispers haunted them, a reminder that some spirits are never truly at rest. It was Halloween night, and the town of Ravens Hollow was buzzing with excitement. Every year, the streets filled with kids in costumes, pumpkins glowed on porches, and the air was thick with the scent of candy and mischief. But there was one house that no one ever visited. The old, crumbling mansion at the end of Cedar Lane, known simply as the Shadow House. For years, the house had been abandoned, its windows boarded up, and the yard overgrown with weeds. The townsfolk whispered about strange noises coming from inside and shadows moving in the windows when no one was there. No one dared to go near it, except for the bravest of kids, and only on a dare. This Halloween, 12-year-old Josh and his friends, Max and Emily, were feeling extra bold. Josh had just moved to Ravens Hollow a few months ago, and his friends were trying to outdo each other with stories of the town's spooky legends. But the Shadow House was the crown jewel of their tales. "We should go inside," Josh said, trying to sound fearless. Max and Emily exchanged uneasy glances. "You mean tonight?" Emily asked, her voice a little shaky. "Why not? It's just an old house. All those stories are fake anyway," Josh said. trying to convince himself more than anyone. Max looked around. It's Halloween. If we're ever going to do it, tonight's the night. And just like that, the dare was set. Later that night, after trick-or-treating, they met at the edge of Cedar Lane. The house loomed in the distance, its silhouette black against the moonlit sky. The closer they got, the quieter the neighborhood became. It was as if the house swallowed all sound, leaving only the crunch of their feet on the gravel road. "Still think this is a good idea?" Emily whispered. Josh didn't answer. The house looked more intimidating up close. Its broken shutters dangled on rusty hinges, and the front door hung slightly ajar, as if waiting for them. Max stepped forward first, pushing the door open with a creak that echoed through the night. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of decay. Broken furniture lay scattered across the floor, and cobwebs hung like curtains from the ceiling. The only light came from the moon, shining through the cracks in the boarded-up windows. "This place is creepy," Max said, trying to keep his voice steady. Emily clung to Josh's arm. "Let's just look around and get out of here. We proved our point." But Josh wasn't ready to leave. Something about the house intrigued him. It felt like it was pulling him deeper, like it had been waiting for them. "Let's check out the upstairs," he said, moving toward the staircase. As they climbed, the wooden steps groaned under their weight. The hallway at the top was lined with old family portraits, their eyes staring down at the kids, as if watching their every move. "This is like something out of a horror movie," Emily whispered. They reached the end of the hall, where a door stood slightly ajar. Josh pushed it open and froze. The room was filled with old toys, dolls, teddy bears, wooden blocks, covered in dust, as if no one had touched them in years. But what made his heart race was the mirror on the wall. It was cracked, but in its reflection, he could see something that wasn't in the room. "Do you guys see that?" Josh asked, pointing to the mirror. Max and Emily squinted at it. In the reflection, a shadowy figure stood in the corner of the room. A tall, dark figure with hollow eyes, staring back at them. "Let's get out of here!" Emily screamed, grabbing Josh's arm. But the door slammed shut behind them with a force that shook the walls. Josh rushed to the door, yanking at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. "It's locked!" he shouted, panic rising in his chest. The room grew colder. The toys on the shelves began to tremble, and a low whisper filled the air. "Leave. Now," the voice hissed, but there was nowhere to go. The shadow in the mirror moved, stepping closer to them with each passing second. Max backed up against the wall, eyes wide with terror. "What is that thing?" "I don't know," Josh yelled, pulling harder at the door. But it was no use. The shadow reached the edge of the mirror, and then it stepped out. The temperature in the room plummeted as the shadowy figure materialized before them. Its face was featureless, just darkness where its eyes, nose, and mouth should have been. It reached out a long, bony hand, and the toys in the room began to shake violently, flying off the shelves as if possessed by some unseen force. Emily screamed as a teddy bear shot past her head, smashing into the wall. Max ducked as a toy truck whizzed by his ear. "We have to do something!" he yelled. Josh, heart pounding, remembered something his grandma had told him about spirits. "They don't like light," she'd said. "Shadows only exist in darkness." "Max, your phone!" Josh shouted. Max fumbled for his phone, his hands trembling as he turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, and for a moment, the shadow figure recoiled, shrinking away from the light. "It's working!" Emily yelled, grabbing her phone and turning on its flashlight as well. The shadow let out an ear-piercing scream, its form flickering and shrinking as the light bathed the room. Josh kicked the door one last time, and it burst open. "Go, go, go!" he shouted, pushing his friends out into the hallway. They raced down the stairs, not daring to look back. The house seemed to groan in protest, as if trying to trap them inside. But they didn't stop. They bolted out the front door, into the cool night air, and didn't stop running until they were back on Cedar Lane, far away from the shadow house. Breathless, they collapsed on the sidewalk, hearts pounding, bodies trembling. For a long moment, none of them spoke. Finally, Emily broke the silence. What was that thing?" Josh shook his head, still trying to catch his breath. "I don't know, but I don't think it wanted us there." Max looked back at the house. "Do you think anyone will believe us?" Josh shrugged. "Doesn't matter. We're never going back there again." And from that night on, the shadow house remained as it always had, silent, dark, and avoided by everyone. But those who dared to look closely could sometimes see a shadow moving behind the cracked windows, waiting for the next group of kids, brave or foolish enough to enter. And as the darkness fades, remember, the real chills linger long after the story's end. Until next time, brave souls.